I absolutely love action movies, and today is going to be my action movie franchise magnum opus. I'm going to take 7 iconic action movie franchises and rank all 31 movies on May 31st from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. If you're up for the challenge, share your ranking of all 31 iconic action movies. My ranking isn't the right ranking, it's just mine, and I would love to see yours. With that in mind, 3 of my YouTube buddies also joined me in on this quest, and they put up their own 31 on 31 action movie rankings. Cody Leach, CP, and Brian Lomax also did this. You can find links to their videos right up here, right down there. Somewhere around here you can find their rankings, so if you disagree with me, maybe you'll agree with them. Be sure to check out their videos, click like, hit the subscribe button, all that fun stuff. One more thing before we get started, I have a companion video to this over on my Patreon page where I just ranked the 7 franchises, not the movie specifically, but the franchises as a whole. If you want to know how those kind of fall in the scheme of things, join over on Patreon at any level. You can check out that video, and let's get started. Coming in last place is A Good Day to Die Hard. When I set out to make this list, I was pretty sure I knew what movie was going to come in first and what movie was going to come in last, and I was absolutely correct about what was going to be in last place. This movie is an absolute embarrassment to the franchise. There's nothing distinct about the action, the plot, the characterizations that would tie it to the previous Die Hard movies. Bruce Willis is not playing John McClane. He's just cranky old Bruce Willis. He has no chemistry with Jai Courtney, his son. In the first 60% of this movie is his son talking down to him. You don't tune into a Die Hard movie to have a disrespectful son looking down to John McClane. Even the plot kind of has John screwing things up. That's not at all what you want from a Die Hard movie. Nothing about this movie is redeeming. It's just a generic bad addition to a fantastic franchise. Number 30, The Bourne Legacy. I actually kind of like the idea of doing kind of this spin-off story about all the other assassins in the world of Jason Bourne and what would happen to them. The cast is quite good. It's the plot that they chose that just doesn't really work. There's not really hardly any action until about an hour and a half into the movie. There's very few action sequences, and an awful lot of the dialogue is just scientific mumbo jumbo as they're talking about what pills he needs to take and when he needs to take them. And there's no satisfaction at the end because they're not trying to take out the bad guys. They're just trying to survive a couple days. And so this one was a real dud for me. Next up is Mission Impossible 2. Now, I think the action in this movie, when it does happen, is actually quite good. John Woo is excellent with his fight choreography. It's very stylized. And so there's no shortage of very cool stunt moments in the last 20 minutes of the film. But the first hour and 15 minutes of this movie have almost no action. It's this love story that you don't really care too much about. And then the plot kicks in literally over an hour into the film. They really needed to have the events that happen at an hour and 15 minutes happen at about 25 minutes into the film to give it a sense of urgency, momentum, and excitement. They didn't do that, and so the movie's just really boring for 60% of its runtime. Real quick before I move on this list, every other movie from here above, I would give a positive score to. So you might be like, what? You didn't like whatever movie I have at number 27. No, I did like that movie. I would give it a positive review. I just love action movies, and so this is a stacked list of films that I love, so don't get too mad at me when one of your favorites is too low on the list. Coming in at number 28 is Jason Bourne. Now, I'm fine with this film. Some of the action sequences are very cool, in particular the Grease sequence, as well as the car chase through the strip of Las Vegas. And there's some interesting ideas inside the plot about maybe them trying to recruit Jason Bourne back, but I think they just went too far into trying to find some personal motivation to bring Jason Bourne back into this adventure, in which case they're giving more revelations about his past, and I think this kind of cheapened what they revealed in Ultimatum. Then there's an assassin that's tied to his past, Julia Stiles is returning, and stuff happens to her, and You put it all together and it just wasn't as good as it probably should have been. Then we have Rambo Last Blood. Now this is a film that I think I would have responded better to it if it was just a standalone story about Stallone doing his hard R, mean-spirited version of Taken. I think I would have liked it a lot more because there's no shortage of carnage, bloodlust in the last 20 minutes, and all these guys you want to see get just torn to pieces. He tears them to pieces. But as kind of the final Rambo movie, it ends the franchise on a real sour note, especially after the fourth film that seemed like it bookended the original really nicely. This just feels like a really sour epilogue to the franchise. Number 26, Bad Boys. Now this is a buddy cop action film that, while I enjoy it, I've never liked it as much as I think I should. Right off the bat, our two leads do have a lot of chemistry, and I really enjoy Téa Leoni, and Michael Bay, when just doing action movies, brings plenty of energy to the mix. But when it comes to some of these iconic franchises and the first entries in them, this is one that's just never been kind of that top tier for me. It's always been like, that was pretty fun. I enjoyed that. But the other movies in the franchise, I think, did it better. Bringing us into the top 25, Lethal Weapon 3. Now, our two leads have just as much chemistry as ever, but the script here is really rough, especially for the first 30 minutes, where they have Riggs and Murtaugh blow up a building, and then the next scene after that, when they're kind of demoted, they harass a citizen. Riggs screws up a photo shoot and then abuses the director on set. They did not know how to write Riggs in this movie and kind of give him his crazy edge without just being an awful person. Now, some of what kind of helps it out is, I think, the addition of bringing in Rene Russo into the mix, I think, gives some new spark and energy to the film. But of the Lethal Weapon movies, this one I felt was by far the one that was the most all over the place. Next up is Die Hard 2, Die Harder. This is a frustrating one for me because it's not a film that I have a bunch of specific problems with. It's not as if I could point out these plot points or scenes that just didn't work for me, but it's a sequel that just feels too much like the original, has a few too many beats that are repeated, even having the reporter just happen to being on the plane with the wife once again. In which case, if I'm in the mood for that kind of Die Hard movie, I'm just gonna rewatch the original one. So this one just doesn't have much of a place for me. Well, I don't have any problems with it. If I do watch it, I have fun with it. There's just nothing fresh or new here. Number 23, Lethal Weapon 4. Much like Lethal Weapon 3, this one feels a little bit stale, like they're running a bit out of fresh ideas, but it's kept afloat, I think, by the addition of Jet Li as the villain, which is really nice to see him as such a cruel character and just beating the heroes up inside of a film. And then Chris Rock, kind of in his prime of just being a really funny addition to the film. Comes to the story, some of the interactions, a little bit on the rough spot, but still an entertaining film. Then we have Rambo 3. I believe at the time this movie came out, it was the most expensive film of all time. And for movies of that time, it is a big, gigantic action movie where when helicopters are battling an army of people, they do a big swooping shot where you just see how big this sequence was, how many explosions were happening, how many extras they needed. And in that regard, this one delivers on all the 80s chaos carnage that you want. It's also really nice to see Troutman joining in on the action and not just being kind of stuck in an office delivering exposition and speeches. Here, he actually gets to run around with a gun and everything like that. And this is also like peak physical shape Stallone, where his legendary status was solidified. As a Rambo movie, you could also tell that this was when Stallone himself was in peak movie star mode, and so it's written a lot more as a big slick blockbuster. Every line is written like a catchphrase or a quotable line for the trailer, though it feels a little bit out of place with the franchise. Coming in at number 21 is Bad Boys 2. This movie came out at essentially the peak of Will Smith's career when Michael Bay was still doing these big gaudy action movies before he moved into Transformers territory. And for that reason, this is one of like the most biggest and over-the-top straight-up action movies of all time. When there's an action sequence, the camera's always swooping in motion. When there's a car chase, cars are flying all over the place. And because of that, it's just a lot of fun to see Michael Bay doing Michael Bay's thing as a rated R action movie. It definitely goes on too long. The movie feels like it has 3 climaxes in a row. I've always felt when watching this movie like, oh, this is the end of the movie. Wait, there's a little bit more. There's a little bit more, and they're getting bigger and more explosions. So a little bit too much. But that's also kind of the fun of the movie. We've made it to the top 20 with Rambo First Blood Part 2. The first draft of this movie was actually written by James Cameron, and I think you can feel the voices of Stallone as well as Cameron all over this film. As a follow-up to the movie First Blood, it's a pretty bizarre change of genre and tone, but it fits perfectly into the time period where it came out, where action movies were over the top, ridiculous, and where there was a certain desire to wave the American flag, and this movie does a whole lot of this, and it captures kind of the zeitgeist of that time, and having Rambo win the Vietnam War for a generation of disenfranchised soldiers. You know, at its core, I think it lacks a little bit of, I don't know, on the character side, you don't feel a lot of emotion while watching it. There's plenty of big action. Troutman has some great speeches that he gives. You have the moments where you're just satisfied to watch Rambo take out these guys. A little simplistic, though, at the same time, and doesn't age all that well. Next up is Mission Impossible 3, J.J. Abrams' directorial debut, where he took a lot of the tricks that he used on the TV show Alias and applied them to the Mission Impossible franchise, and I think kind of breathed a nice fresh air into it after Mission Impossible 2 and kind of set the trajectory of where the franchise has gone ever since. It's got some fantastic action sequences in it as one of the best villains of the entire franchise with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character. And then it's also nice to see kind of Billy Crudup as well as Lawrence Fishburne show up inside the film. Feels a little bit pulled in a few too many directions, and some of the back and forth tactics of how he tells the story don't fully pay off, but a really nice change of direction for the franchise. Next up, John Wick 3 Parabellum. This is a really frustrating one for me because when it comes to the stunt work and action in this film, it's just top notch, the best of a franchise that already had amazing stunt work. They did a bunch of stuff where I don't know how they shot it, but they invented new stunt, visual, special effects techniques. I'm not even sure how they did it to do some just amazing stuff with this film, and just kept progressing what they were doing with moving stunt work forward. When it came to the plot, I thought it got a little bit bogged down in the mythology. The stuff that worked really nicely in the first two felt a little bit too much here. And the thing that really bugged me is I think that by leaving it on a cliffhanger as opposed to resolving the plot line, it just put a sour taste in my mouth. If this one had resolved, if this had closed out the trilogy, it might have been my favorite of the bunch, but because it just felt like half of a story, I left the movie kind of disappointed while it has amazing action and delivered everything I wanted it to deliver. Number 17, Live Free or Die Hard. Now, this is a movie that as soon as it came out, it kind of polarized audiences. A lot of people really didn't like what they did with John McClane. Honestly, I've always enjoyed this film. In fact, when I was rewatching it for this video, I assumed I was going to like it less, but it actually affirmed that I really enjoy this film, and it's an entertaining action movie. I don't mind the PG-13 rating. I don't mind that it's a little bit more over the top than the previous films. The action is shot pretty well. Bruce Willis is giving a John McClane performance, and they kind of give him a little bit of an arc. And the additions of Justin Long as well as his daughter inside of it, I think balance him out really nicely. And so this was a perfectly fine 21st century addition to the franchise for me. Then we have Bad Boys for Life. Now, when they finally announced this movie was really happening, I thought it was 10 years too late, a bad idea. Then they said they were going to release it in January, and I thought, oh, that's a bad sign. This is not going to be a good movie. And then the trailers, they kind of worked for me. They actually kind of worked. And I went to go see it at the press screening, left the theater, was like, I think I really dug that. I think that one might be my favorite one. I wasn't quite sure if I was just in the excitement of the moment of watching a movie or what. And then I rewatched it on home video with my wife for this video, and I was like, I think without question that was my favorite of the bunch, and it managed to have all the chemistry between the two characters, better kind of character arcs for them, still very exciting action, while not necessarily as over the top as the second one, still a lot of fun. And then they found more emotion inside of it and had some deeper kind of mythology stuff that all of it actually landed for me, and it made it the best of the trilogy. Coming in at number 15 is the Bourne Ultimatum. This one has always been my least favorite of the original Bourne trilogy, while still, of course, being a great film. When it comes to the action, there's several just iconic, great sequences in this movie with the fighting, the chases, and especially that kind of opening thriller spy sequence with the reporter, just done so well to get you on the edge of your seat without needing a bunch of explosions and gunshots to make it exciting. Kind of holds this one back for me. I think they went too far with the shaky cam and close-ups and chopped to pieces. And so that kind of detracted from the quality of some of the action for me, as well as the third act goes into really heavy exposition mode where I was like, oh, cool. But it wasn't as satisfying or wow-inducing as it felt like it needed to be to close out the trilogy, especially as the final sequence of the movie. Then we have John Wick Chapter 2. After the first movie, I wasn't really sure how they were going to do a sequel that would work the way the first movie did. Like, who else are they going to kill to kind of set him off? And instead of trying to give this personal motive to set him on revenge mode, the thing they did very wisely was doubling down on the mythology that worked so well in the first film, and it made a great companion and continuation of that film in a way that made sense, built out the world that they'd already done such a great job of building in the first film, and continued this very cool action style that they did with this film, or these films, in which case, just a really good sequel to an already very good film. Number 13, the original Mission Impossible. Of all the films on this list, this might be the least action movie of them all. As our hero, I don't believe he ever shoots a gun in the entire film, and it focuses a lot more on the spy stuff, the thrills, the sneaking around than it does on our hero punching people in the face and shooting them in the chest. And for that reason, it even stands out inside of its own franchise as the most spy movie in a more traditional sense, an espionage film, than the other Mission Impossible films for that reason. Now, the actual twist at the end of who the villain is has always been a little bit frustrating for me, especially in light of the fact that it's an adaptation of a TV show from the 60s, and the reveal that they did is pretty gross if you're a fan of the original TV series, but at the end of the day, a very cool spy film. Next up, Rambo. After nearly 20 years, Rambo returned, and it abandoned all of the glitz and gloss of the previous two Rambo films and just tried to narrow in on this idea that war is hell, it is brutal, it is gross, and it's not something to just be romanticized. And in doing so, made one of the more interesting films in the franchise, as you really get to see just how dark of a person Rambo is and how brutal his existence has been. I think there's some great moments of dialogue between him and the female lead in the film, kind of understanding where he's coming from in his worldview, and her slowly pulling him out of it, him slowly helping her realize how naive that maybe her perspective on some of this stuff is. And there's just some real memorable sequences, especially all the boatman stuff. I love all that stuff and just the carnage of it. It's actually a movie that I wish that he hadn't gone so bare bones on it. I think if this movie was about 10, 15 minutes longer, I'd like it'd be even higher up on this list. At number 11, John Wick. This is one of these movies that is so much better than it should have been. When the first trailer came out, it was only about a month before the movie's release, and all of us were a little bit confused, like, Keanu Reeves is out for revenge over his dog? How is this going to work? And then we went to go see the movie, and they found a way to take kind of a silly premise, play it dead serious, and make like the premium action franchise of the last decade. It has an interesting character that you want to know more about. They did this awesome world building with the Continental and this code amongst these assassins and these coins they use for everything. And then, of course, it had such a unique, distinct style for all of the action. Every single action sequence is exciting in its own right. It's different from the previous ones, and it added to the world of stunt work. It was practical stuff, all of it very cool, and one of these movies that was just such a pleasant surprise. Bringing us into the top 10 is Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. Now, this is a film that I had such a great time seeing it in the theater because I saw it at an actual IMAX theater in downtown Austin. And the Dubai sequence where he is dangling from that building in IMAX is the best sequence I have ever seen in a movie theater. The most immersive, edge of your seat, like, this is cinema right here. This is how you do stunt work in film and action sequence. Just absolutely phenomenal. And the movie just in general, the first hour just moves at such a brisk pace. It's really funny. Every time the action stops, the dialogue kind of peps up and makes you laugh a little bit. There's all these great spy gadget moments, like where they're breaking into the Kremlin with this gadget that shoots the screen behind them. Just a great little sequence. The thing that holds this one back from being literally top 5 is that it kind of runs out of steam as soon as we get past the Dubai sequence. The 40 minutes after that aren't as exciting as the hour before that, so it feels a little bit like it ends on a bit of a lull when you should probably end on a high note. Number 9, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, continuing the hot streak that was Mission Impossible 3 and then Ghost Protocol. We get Rogue Nation, and the thing that I love that this one did is it really started to flesh out the world of how the IMF is kind of associated with the government, how it's perceived, how they have to interact with things, in building this very deep mythology where the previous 4 had all really been these standalone kind of stories where you weren't sure how it all connected. This one started to build it all out in a way that was very cool. It also introduced another one of the great villains of the franchise into the mix as this guy running kind of this rogue nation of evil IMF type agents trying to lead to chaos in the world. Of course, more awesome stunt work and the great addition of Rebecca Ferguson into the mix as kind of this female spy. Just kind of hit all the right notes. Next up, Die Hard with a Vengeance. What I love about this movie is not only is it a real true follow-up to the original Die Hard, but it's very New York City centric. John McClane is one of the most famous New York City cops in all of film history, and in only one of his 5 movies do we spend time in actual New York City, and that's what this movie is, and you get to feel the city of New York as almost a character inside of the film. Add to that, Samuel L. Jackson is kind of the perfect person to partner up with John McClane inside the film, and it just adds a really nice dynamic to where it feels like this is a scenario John McClane would find himself in, feels like a Die Hard movie, but it isn't in any way just rehashing what they did with the original film, which is obviously my criticism of Die Hard 2. Something new, different. It peters out a little bit in that third act, like they didn't know exactly how to land the ship, but besides that, a very cool action movie. Number 7, The Bourne Identity. I've always kind of had a soft spot or been intrigued by amnesia action thrillers. I love this concept of someone waking up to discover they have a bunch of skills that they don't know where they came from. And for that reason, this one has always been a movie that I've really enjoyed. Likewise, because I'm not crazy about Paul Greengrass's shaky cam, chop to pieces, close-up shots for the action, I think this movie has the best action of the franchise, and it just works a little bit better because you can see what's happening inside of the sequences. Add to that, it's nice to see him on the run. It's more of a road trip movie than even a spy film in certain regards. Builds out a nice mythology, but like a number of films on this list, the weakest part of the movie is kind of that third act where he grabs someone and drops down a stairwell and uses them as padding. Kind of a weird way to end your movie that otherwise seemed really well thought out. Then we have the Bourne Supremacy. Honestly, almost every other time I've ranked the Bourne films, I've had Bourne Identity in that top spot, but rewatching the movies this time, what stuck out to me is that this is where we really get to see Jason Bourne become the spy. Not just reacting, but proactively going into action on a mission. Where I mentioned the previous one, kind of road trip movie, this is him trying to get information and take out bad guys and using his skill set. Add to that, there's a lot of character elements to it of he's kind of diving into his past and having to deal with what he did as the assassin Jason Bourne. And it ends on a much better note than I think the previous one did, as it has several kind of satisfying conclusions to the story arcs that were set up. Bringing us into the top 5 is Mission Impossible Fallout. The 6th film in the franchise, I think, really is the best of the bunch, as it continued what they did so well with Rogue Nation and Ghost Protocol and really built out the whole franchise and had little ties back to all these different movies, and it made the franchise as a whole better by giving the through line to all of it. Add to it, Henry Cavill is such a great addition to the movie. It's just this sleazy as can be character that's great with the physical action. Tom Cruise, even though he was in his mid-late 50s when he did this movie, was still at the top of his game, did not skip a beat, was willing to break his ankle to do the action sequences, still has the emotion, the character moments, thrills, edge of your seat, and it just seemed to take everything that worked about this franchise and deliver it all in one film that tied the whole franchise together. Number 4, Lethal Weapon. For me, Lethal Weapon is the best buddy cop action franchise that we have out there. Riggs and Murtaugh have just a great chemistry between the two of them, and all of it starts in this film, by far the most serious of the Lethal Weapon movies, that are just kind of diving into the idea of this Riggs character that's deeply broken because of his past. He is suicidal, and you have Murtaugh, who's been living a little bit too comfortably and needs a little crazy in his life. Riggs needs the family man in his life, and the two coming together, it's just the exact formula that you want for a buddy cop action movie. Add to it, Gary Busey, of course, is always a great, crazy villain to throw into a movie like this. What holds it back a little bit, I always go back and forth between Lethal Weapon 2. I think that the first one is a little bit clunkier in the structure, and there's some scenes where it's like they fake Riggs' death and then immediately we're in another sequence. It just should have slowed down a little bit in some of those sequences, but obviously we're very high up on this list. I love this movie. Real quick, before I give you my top 3, be sure to share your ranking down below in the comment section if you're up for the challenge. After this is done, remember to check out my buddies' version of this exact same video where they ranked all 31 movies, had their totally different perspectives. You can find that somewhere around here. I think some buttons, links down below, something like that. And also, if you want me to see my ranking of the actual franchises themselves, the 7 franchises being ranked in this video, that's over on my Patreon page. Join at any level. Join at any level. You can unlock that and find that video and so much more. In third place is Lethal Weapon 2. As I mentioned before, I always go back and forth between these two movies, and I just find the second one to be so much fun that for that reason, it just inches out the first one, and I think it flows a little bit better. There's so many classic Riggs moments inside of this film where he's harassing the diplomat. Just the line, "diplomatic immunity," is so memorable and catchy. That's been stuck in my head literally since about the year 1990. And just in general, this is what this franchise is all about, and just a lot of fun. Our runner-up is First Blood, where the Rambo sequels kind of took the franchise and went way over the top with it, especially 2 and 3, which made these romanticized war films where one person is winning the Vietnam War. This one is a much more serious character study that had a lot to say about the treatment of Vietnam veterans when they returned from the war, as well as the trauma that veterans faced from everything that they went through. And for that reason, while it is exciting and a movie that has some very cool action at certain points in time, it's also a very sad film, a very tragic film that has a lot more emotion than some people realize if they haven't watched it in a long time, or if they've never seen it and they just know what the franchise turned into. When you go back and watch this one, it's a much deeper film than a lot of people give it credit for. But easily coming in first place is Die Hard. For me, this is the perfect action movie with a script that is just perfectly crafted. Everything that happens in the first 20 minutes pays off later inside of the film. It doesn't cheat. It doesn't cut corners to make things happen. It sets everything up. You care about the characters. It has a villain that, while he doesn't have this motivation that you're like, oh, I understand why he's doing that, he's interesting and fun and charismatic as just this bad robber, fake terrorist guy played to perfection by Alan Rickman. Of course, Bruce Willis as John McClane is the quintessential action hero that doesn't want to be the action hero. He's just the guy that happens to be there that has to get the job done. It has family dynamics. It can be funny at times. It's relatable. And of course, it has fantastic action. Everything about it is top notch. So without question, coming in at number 1 is Die Hard. If you've enjoyed this video and want more like it, be sure to check out my buddies' videos all over here where they also did the 31 on 31 challenge. Or if you want me to talk more action movies and specifically rank the 7 franchises, the link is down below to my Patreon page to check it out to see if it's right for you. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.